Today's Washing Tech episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at washingtech.com/book. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And also Warby Parker. Get a free 5-day home try-on at warbyparkertrial.com/Joe. 5 pairs, 5 days, and the try-on is 100% free. That's warbyparkertrial.com/Joe.
I think there's a little bit of this tension with the idea that what antitrust law is supposed to do is punish big companies for doing something we don't like.
Welcome to the Washing Tech Policy Podcast. We deliver the latest tech policy news and brightest tech policy experts to you, wherever you are, so you can stay productive, relevant, and informed in less time. From Washington, D.C., it's the Washing Tech Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
Facebook blocks race, age, gender, and zip code ad targeting for housing, employment, and credit. Democrats set a date to vote on the Save the Internet Act, and Maureen Ohlhausen is my guest. Hey everybody, Facebook is no longer permitting housing, employment, and credit advertisers to target users based on their age, race, gender, or zip code. The new prohibitions are part of a settlement with several advocacy organizations that filed discrimination lawsuits against Facebook after ProPublica published an investigative report showing its ability to exclude certain ethnicities from seeing housing ads. House Democrats plan to vote on Monday, April 8th, on the bill that would reinstate the 2015 net neutrality rules, the Save the Internet Act. Opponents are trying to tack on a bunch of amendments, even though the bill is pretty straightforward in terms of its intended scope. Even if the bill passes the House, though, it faces an uphill battle in Mitch McConnell's lair high up on the mountain. I mean, the Senate. And the president would also have to sign it. We'll see what happens. Every week, it's some new problem with Facebook. This time, the security firm Krevzon Security found that for years, Facebook stored hundreds of millions of usernames and passwords in a text file. What's the problem with that, you ask? Well, the text file was searchable by any of Facebook's 20,000 employees. So let's say a date didn't go so well and some brah who happens to work at Facebook decides that he's going to take stuff out on you. Well, you could just go ahead and search for your password. Facebook has allegedly used this method of storing passwords in a text file dating back as far as 2012. Allegedly. House Oversight Chair Elijah Cummings has demanded documents from the attorney representing Jared Kushner regarding Kushner's use of a private email address and WhatsApp to conduct official business. This, of course, is the same thing Republicans went after Hillary Clinton for during the 2016 presidential campaign. The FCC will pay $43,000 in attorney's fees and costs to a New York journalist named Jason Prechtel for failing to turn over information under a Freedom of Information Act FOIA request related to fake comments filed in the net neutrality proceeding. The case was settled without prejudice, which means the FCC won't admit to any wrongdoing, even though it didn't respond to the journalist within the statutory time frame. California Republican Representative David Nunes? Is it Nunes or Nunes? Anyway, he's suing Twitter and 3 users for $250 million, saying he was defamed and claiming that Twitter bans conservative viewpoints. I don't know, man. Seems like a pretty steep First Amendment hurdle. Finally, after 2 years, President Trump has finally named a chief technology officer. Michael Kratsios is just 32, but well-connected and worked for Thiel Capital. Peter Thiel, as you'll recall, is a Donald Trump supporter. Events today, Tuesday, March 26th, at the Hudson Institute. How does the U.S. maintain its competitive edge in 5G? Panel discussion, 9:15 to 11 a.m. at 1201 Pennsylvania Avenue. It will be live streamed. Also, we've got the Senate Commerce Committee hearing on small business perspectives on the federal data privacy framework. That's 2:30 at Dirksen 562. And tomorrow, Wednesday, March 27th, House Judiciary Committee hearing called Lost Einsteins, Lack of Diversity in Patent Inventorship and the Impact on America's Innovation Economy, 10 a.m., 2141 Rayburn. And then on Friday, March 29th at Brookings, the Stephen Breyer Lecture, Digital Technology in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, A Comparative Perspective. That's 10:30 to 12 noon at the Falk Auditorium at Brookings, 1776 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest. And this one will be webcast as well. And you can find links to all of these stories and the events in the show notes and also in our Twitter feed. And our handle is at WashingTech. Stay with us. For WashingTech Tech Policy Podcast listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You can listen at the gym, in the car, or on your morning run. How about Love and Ruin, a novel by Paula McLean?
My mother, Edna, was always the North Star in my sky, and also kinder than anyone living. She was warm and intelligent and good all through, and though she'd devoted her life to tirelessly championing women's rights and was ready always to be on the right side of things and people and causes, somehow the campaigns and marches and community speeches never got in the way of her being a mother or a wife.
You can download Love and Ruin free by trying audible.com. Sign up for your free audiobook and 30-day trial today at washingtech.com/book.
Tech policy is global policy. This is the Washing Tech Policy Podcast, serving the world.
My guest today is Maureen Ohlhausen, Antitrust and Competition Law Practice Chair and Partner at the law firm of Baker Botts. Previously, she served as acting chairman at the Federal Trade Commission for 2 years, and prior to that, as a commissioner for 6. She directed all aspects of the FTC's antitrust work, including merger review and conduct enforcement, and steered all FTC consumer protection enforcement with a particular emphasis on privacy and technology issues. Prior to her role as a commissioner, Maureen led the FTC's Internet Access Task Force, which produced an influential report analyzing competition and consumer protection legal issues in the area of broadband and internet. In private practice, she headed the FTC practice group at a leading telecommunications firm representing and counseling telecommunications and technology clients on antitrust compliance, privacy, and consumer protection matters before the FTC and the FCC. She also clerked at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Please welcome Maureen Ohlhausen. Maureen Ohlhausen, thanks for joining me.
Joe, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you about these great topics.
So Elizabeth Warren released a plan during South by Southwest to break up big tech companies like Google, Amazon, and Facebook. But are these companies really like the Standard Oils and AT&Ts of the past, or even the Microsofts for that matter? What are some of the similarities and dissimilarities that you see, Maureen, between those marketplaces and those of Google, Amazon, and Facebook?
Well, looking at it both with my former enforcer hat, being the former acting chairman of the Federal Trade Commission and a commissioner for 6 years, and now in my role at Baker Botts as a co-chair of the antitrust group, what I always look at is what are antitrust laws really meant to do? What are they focused at? And what antitrust law has really focused on in the past 30, 40 years is consumer welfare. What are the benefits to consumers? Are they getting good prices? Are they getting convenience? Are they getting selection? The kinds of things that consumers care about. So when we're looking at some of these big companies, I think that's one of the important things to look at. Are we seeing an effect in the marketplace where it's bad outcomes for consumers, higher prices, less convenience, poor choices, things like that? Now, of course, competition is the way, through our market system, we think that consumers get the best outcomes. Do they get the best choices in the marketplace? And so what antitrust law is looking at is, are these companies competing on the merits? Are they winning by kind of, providing the best product and service and choice to consumers, or are they winning by disabling competitors? So I think that's the important thing to look at. So when you look at these companies, for example, Google, Amazon, Facebook, I think that's the question you need to be asking. Are they competing on the merits? Have they gotten their strong market positions by being the best competitors in their space. Or, look at the Microsoft case, the D.C. Circuit there found that the company had engaged in some exclusionary behavior that was keeping a competitor out of the market, not by Microsoft being the strongest competitor, but by Microsoft kind of disabling that competitor in a way that didn't ultimately benefit consumers.
Mm-hmm. And so with Amazon, for example, creating its own marketplace, do you think that the courts will be more likely to compare Amazon to Walmart, or do you think that they will look at the way Amazon treats independent providers of products that Amazon then replicates and sells themselves?
Well, I think you need to be careful about it, analogy of saying, well, is it this kind of company or that kind of company? Because every antitrust law case is really dependent on the facts. So what are the outcomes for consumers? What's the benefits to competition? But when you look at something like a company, like a large company providing store brand products, right, that compete with brand names, I mean, that's very common in the marketplace, right? So I think you'd have to look carefully at whether that behavior is benefiting consumers by giving them more choices and lower prices, or is it causing some kind of reduction in choice for consumers or higher prices, right? That's what we often look at in antitrust. And, when you look at a behavior that is very common across the marketplace, many stores, many retailers have their own brand of things. You think of, Kirkland coffee, that I drank this morning, right? That's offered by Costco. So, a commonplace behavior like that, often is seen as pro-competitive or competitively neutral. But that's not to say that there can't be in some unique situation where you have a company that has, some kind of unique position where it could become a problem. But for the most part, that kind of behavior in antitrust law has been seen as giving, benefits to consumers.
So in support of Elizabeth Warren's plan, what do you think the legal arguments will be there? What would you anticipate? How would that work?
Well, I mean, I think there's some challenges to her implementing that kind of plan without a change in the antitrust laws, right? So you're saying, how would the legal analysis work? Mm-hmm. For example, the call about the Amazon Whole Foods, right? Mm-hmm. To undo that merger, which the FTC cleared while I was the acting chairman. I think you'd have to say, well, what negative impact has there been in the grocery market such that this deal should be unwound? You look at what the D.C. Circuit's decision in the Microsoft case, where they had to consider what is an appropriate remedy to an antitrust violation. And they said, the district court was looking at whether Microsoft should be broken up. And the court said, well, look, you really have to tie the remedy to the anti-competitive harm. So if you look at undoing the Amazon Whole Foods merger, you would say, well, have we seen a negative effect in the grocery market, right? Because that was Amazon bought a grocery store. And I would say, thus far, we haven't, Washingtonian Magazine had a cover story just last year about how this is the golden age of grocery shopping. And I think what we've seen is a pro-competitive response in that market. So I think how you would implement some of her proposals under current law, I think would be highly, highly difficult. I think you would need antitrust law to be changed and antitrust law to be pursuing different goals than the consumer goals that antitrust law pursues now.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you see as the role of antitrust? I know you mentioned consumers, but I and millions of people are really concerned about what's happening to liberal democracies around the world. Do you see a role for antitrust as a mechanism to address that, or do you see a need to invent an entirely new legal doctrine basically here?
Right. So, I mean, I'm not saying that I would support such proposals. I think you're asking me what would need to happen for Elizabeth Warren's proposals to be implemented, right? But a couple of things. Now, look, on merger law, I do think it's important. There are network effects in industry. There can be, accumulations of market power that's unrelated. It's not from competing on the merits and winning the race, right? If you are just simply buying your competitor, right, and giving yourself market power that way, without, in a way that would be anti-competitive, antitrust law should continue to be vigilant there and, look at mergers, carefully, particularly if there are going to be network effects, to see, okay, are our antitrust tools sufficient to detect the anti-competitive things that might happen or that are likely to happen down the road. So I think, that continues to be important, that, antitrust law should focus on, combinations that are likely to cause anti-competitive effects. And by anti-competitive effects, I mean it's, bad outcomes for consumers. I think there's a little bit of this tension with the idea that what antitrust law is supposed to do is punish big companies for doing something we don't like. Mm-hmm. If it's a big company and they've done something we don't like, antitrust is the tool. But I think that is an oversimplification. And I think there are other regulatory tools that we should look at. For example, if we are concerned about privacy violations, I don't think antitrust law is the right tool to address that. I think the privacy law is, and consumer protection law, like the tools the FTC has. There's a robust debate going on in Congress now whether we should come up with a new federal privacy law that would address, big companies and small companies, because some of the problems have also occurred, or frequently problems have occurred with data being, abused or not safeguarded appropriately by small companies as well. So I think that is one of the tools that we should look at. Now, for other issues, like we do, with social media, I think there are, concerns about what the impacts are on debate, what the impacts are in society. I'm not sure that antitrust is the right tool. And we also have the First Amendment, right? We have the First Amendment in the U.S., and we always need to, antitrust is still subject to the First Amendment as well. So I think perhaps we need to think more about the marketplace of ideas and how do we counter, ideas that we don't like. The Supreme Court has said, we have more speech. Right. That's how we, and certainly anything that's false or misleading or that's, inappropriate disclosure of consumers' personal information, the consumer protection laws prohibit now, and we should continue to make sure those laws are robust.
Well, Maureen, thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, a lot to unpack here. Now let's turn to your icebreaker, your career hack, and your pick for our book this week. Okay, so it's time for this week's icebreaker. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Well, Joe, I've been given lots of advice in the various roles that I've played in my life. But for my professional career, particularly when I was starting as an FTC commissioner, I asked someone who had long played a role in government, in a high-level government official role. And he said, do the right thing and everything else will follow. And I thought that was just such excellent advice. Kind of stick true to your principles, and you can't always see what's the next challenge or how things will play out, but having that clear goal and pursuing it. What is the role for me? What was the role of an FTC commissioner? What was the job that Congress gave the FTC to do, which was to protect consumers and to promote competition without unduly burdening legitimate business? That's the FTC's mission. So kind of sticking to that and not trying to game out what every, twist and turn of the political debate might be, to me was very, very important advice. And I felt that keeping that in mind as I did my 6 years as a commissioner and particularly my 2 years as the acting chairman, that really, I think, was the best advice that I got starting my job at the FTC.
And I really think that, focusing on substance more than politics keeps you out of some of those personal interactions, personal problems with folks. I think a lot of people get caught up in making personal attacks, particularly these days, and that sort of damages their reputation and their ability to work across the aisle and with even on their own side of the aisle a lot of the times. The best piece of advice I've ever gotten is don't judge your insides by other people's outsides. I think it's something that's very hard to do when you decide to go out on your own, as I have, and go to the beat of your own drum. You see people advancing up the corporate ladder and can feel like, maybe I didn't make the right decision here. But remembering that, don't judge your insides by other people's outsides is helpful because everyone struggles even if they don't look like it. So it's also an idea that I think can help us treat each other a little better, be less self-conscious and have more sort of genuine engagement.
That's really good. A really good observation. I often say a life lived from the inside looks very different than a life from the outside, right?
Yeah.
We all do have
true.
our challenges and struggles and
Absolutely.
missteps.
Absolutely. How do you force yourself to stay focused when distractions arise?
That's a very good question. So I go back to so I had a little bit of a unique experience. I went to law school at night. I started when my oldest was 3 months old, and I had my second child at the end of my second year, and numbers 3 and 4 while I was working. And what I found was that really helped me focus on, I have this limited amount of time. What am I going to get done in that time so that I can then either, meet my responsibilities in my other part of life or enjoy the other part. So having, I think, that those limitations when I was in law school ended up being a real benefit for me because it forced me to focus on the task at hand. I mean, look, everyone gets distracted, and sometimes distraction is good, and that's sort of where your creative thinking comes in as you're daydreaming or something. But I think it just not having had the luxury of a lot of free time that helped me stay focused.
Yeah, I've tried to get good at that, and I have to say I'm a work in progress. I think I'm good at avoiding distractions under pressure and deadline, but I'm always trying to work on kind of doing a little bit each day because work has to get done either way, and it's better, especially once you hit 40, not to do all-nighters anymore. I think.
Right.
Is the goal. What are you reading these days?
So I just finished a book by Paula McLean called Love in Ruins, and it's about Martha Gellhorn, the journalist and war correspondent. I've read some of other Paula McLean books, and I really enjoyed it because I do try to look for books that have strong female characters, women who are, taking risks and doing things and having an impact in the world, even if, not everything in their lives is perfect, because it's not perfect in anyone's life. And I thought it was just a fascinating story. Ernest Hemingway, her husband, gets, lots of attention. He's become this mythical kind of figure, but she really was a groundbreaker. I think she was one of the only, or probably the only female correspondent at D-Day, actually on the beach. And it really, quite an inspiring story.
Yeah, I have 2 girls, and I try to expose them to examples of women who have just, broken barriers. One of them that I just picked up is Well-Read Black Girl, Finding Our Voices, and it's by Glory Edom, and it's from the perspective of different authors and talks about the authors that inspired them when they were growing up. So it's a short vignette that I like to read to them. And then there's a new book by Toni Morrison called The Source of Self-Regard that I got for them as well. That sort of meditations and speeches and selected essays on women. What are some takeaways you'd like to leave with us before we close? And where can we find you online?
The takeaways I'd like to leave you with is that antitrust is a very important tool for protecting competition and markets. And it should be deployed in, a transparent and robust way. But it is focused on consumers and consumer benefits. Not to say that there aren't other values that are important, like privacy or transparency, or you talked about political discourse. Those are all important values, but antitrust may not be the right tool to deploy for that. And so I think, that we kind of need to be very careful about, kind of putting everything on the back of antitrust as if it's going to somehow solve all problems. It's an important tool, but it's not the appropriate ones for free speech and other values. So that's the takeaway that I would have. Privacy is important. We've got a privacy regulator. If we need to strengthen our privacy laws, that's a debate worth having as well. And you can find me on Twitter at _OHLHAUSEN.
And you've been listening to Maureen Ohlhausen, former Federal Trade Commission Commissioner and Acting Chair, and now Antitrust Practice Group Chair and Partner at Baker Botts. Maureen, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks for having me.
That concludes episode 179 of the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what we do, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment and head over to Apple Podcasts. Give it a review. It helps others know what they can expect from the show and really helps us out. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care.
Washington Tech.